doing? We've just been talking about you.
Right on.
It was all good.
How's it going so far?
It's going well. You asked the wrong person. I'm biased. I think it's going wonderfully. But yeah, so far the feedback's been good. But we're all very excited to, for the fifth presentation of the day, which is going to be your good self. I tried to work out how many years you've actually been producing running related books and articles for. How many years is it, would you say now, more or less?
25.
I was so off. And then even prior to that, you did I read the other day somewhere for the first time that you actually started off as comedic poetry?
Yes.
That explains so much. I understand now. I can't believe in one of our podcasts I was saying, oh mate, you should, I can't remember if it was on air or off, I was saying you should try comedy because you just you nail it every single time. I understand you did try comedy originally and you thought I could make more out of
yeah, tough way to make a living.
Right, dude, we're really excited to have you talk about, I've introduced basically a little bit of your history and what you're going to talk about. But I would say, Mara, when Mara's back, we'll just give you the ability to share your screen and we could kick off and listen to what you got to say.
Right on.
Right on.
Yeah, Matt.
Okay, I think we'll kick off. We're 3 minutes early, but we don't have to be British. We can start early. It is international Runchatlive after all. So Matt, you should be able to share your screen soon.
Yes, right now.
Okay. Oh, not yet.
Let me try it again. Sorry.
Okay. The other Matt.
Yeah, the other Matt. It's too many Matts.
It's true. It's 3 Matts in here. Yeah.
Okay.
Now?
Is now.
Yes, I see now. I am the co-host.
So.
Wait a minute. Not given the option to share my PowerPoint. Let me try closing and reopening. If I do, oh, there we go, PowerPoint. Are we seeing that?
Yeah, just need it on a full screen.
Yep.
Beautiful.
You ready to roll?
Okay, I think so. Questions will be in half an hour. So it's all over to you, Matt F.
Right on. Well, I'm so delighted to be here. In scare quotes, I'd much rather be physically present with you all in the UK, but we're making do. So let's talk training. If I have a shtick, it's really, I have a strong conviction just based on my experience as a runner myself, a coach and a writer, that we should model what we do on the practices of the very best runners. Not in a blind sort of way, but my feeling is that if you want to be the best runner you can be, you should look at the race winners and pay attention to what they do, study what they do, and emulate it to a large degree. Whoops. So the title of the presentation is, it's not about the genes why every runner can and should train like a pro. And I should say that this extends, that shtick extends beyond training to, I think, the nutrition practices, psychology. I write on all these topics, but I want to talk training today and make the case that every runner can and should train like a pro. So a quick overview of Oh, by the way, I'll explain the photo first. That's me with 𝐒𝐈𝐒 𝐃𝐈𝐒 back in 2010. If you don't know who he is, Google him, though it's a hard name to spell. But yeah, every now and then, that's like someone on Twitter says, share a photo of the fastest runner you've ever had a photo taken with. And like, I win every time. I have a great collection of myself with lots of fast runners. First, we'll talk about the important difference between talent and trainability. Kind of that gets to the heart of why everyday runners can train like pros. Then we'll talk a little bit about why they don't currently, or why most don't. And then we'll get into some nuts and bolts of what it actually means to train like a pro. I'll present a case study that hits close to home, and then I will take some questions. And first, the photo, that's me with a team of Japanese professional runners. The one in the light blue sweatshirt is Yoko Shibui, who is the former Japanese record holder in the marathon, 219 something. First, the question of what is talent? Like, there's this general supposition that what distinguishes elite runners from mere mortals like myself is talent. But talent is one of those words we sort of assume we know what it means, and then we never actually think it through. So what is it? I like to think about it, talent, as actually having 4 distinct dimensions. If you look at, if you take the genetic angle and look at the genes that elite runners tend to have, or that virtually all elite runners tend to have, and that fewer non-elite runners have. Or you can look at it this way: if you took 1,000 people who were completely untrained and had never run before and had them run, a 5K race, some would do better than others, even without training. And you would find certain genes in those people who have, a higher level of what I call walking around fitness. And there's still a lot left to be learned on this front, but what we've seen so far is that virtually all of those genes underlying, talent for distance running have to do with aerobic power. So how oxygen is extracted from the atmosphere and used by the muscles to sustain high levels of output. But completely distinct, or almost entirely distinct from that walking around fitness, is what I call, well, not what I call, what everyone calls trainability. And trainability is the capacity of the organism to respond to endurance training. And what's interesting is that the genes that underlie trainability are almost entirely distinct from those that underlie, walking around fitness. Those you're just kind of, if you're a good runner, even without training, those genes are different from the ones that allow you to respond to training. Obviously, most elite runners have both. Then a third dimension of talent is durability. And that's, as an often injured runner, I think that one is underappreciated. What allows you to get, assuming you are trainable, what allows you to get the most out of training is to just stay healthy. And as we know, not every runner can and does really stay healthy. And then number 4, horse sense. That's my colloquial term for the psychological dimension, which is hugely underappreciated. But there's more and more good research coming out now showing that high performing, highly successful distance runners really are different in terms of how they use their minds during training and competition. Some of that actually has genetic underpinnings as well, but it's also experience-based and itself trainable, that horse sense piece. Oops. Whoop, what have I done? So yeah, the good news about trainability, obviously, very few of us, oh, by the way, the photo. So the really short guy is the late, great Sammy Wanjiru. And I don't remember the name of the other Kenyan athlete. It's all about Sammy. So the good news on trainability is that, obviously only a tiny percentage of us are born with the sort of walking around fitness, the genes for that aerobic power that would allow us to become Olympians one day. But the genes for trainability are much more widely distributed. This graph on the right gets to that. It's from a study in which the researchers looked at the presence or absence of genes known to contribute to the ability to respond positively to endurance training in just a diverse, heterogeneous group of people. So some slow runners, some fast runners. In fact, I don't even think it was runners, just people. Some unfit, some, let's say, talented people, some untalented people, and some in the middle. And what they found is, you see these columns represent how many of the total number of genes identified. I think so. There were maybe 19 total genes they looked at. And so if you look at the far left, those were the people who had the fewest of those 19 genes, I guess 9 out of the 19. And way over on the right side is the number of people who had them, all of them. And you can see that there's actually a lot more people who on the right-hand side of the graph than on the left, meaning that there were more people who had lots of genes for trainability than people who had few genes for trainability. So that's really good news for us. Even if you're born with average walking around fitness, chances are you have a lot of genes that will allow you to respond positively to training. So why is it that, well, not first, let's make the case that most mortal runners aren't doing what the elites are actually doing training wise. And it goes beyond training. So this is just kind of a laundry list of different aspects of training that elite runners tend to do differently from recreationals. Elite runners tend to train at high volume, recreationals at low to moderate. Elite runners do about 80% of their training at low intensity, recreationals around 50%, only half. Elite runners tend to do a wide variety of different workouts. Recreationals the same 4 over and over. It's not necessarily 4. Elite runners do functional strength training. They have an approach to strength training that is sophisticated and designed especially to meet their specific needs, whereas recreational runners tend to just do what's there, either CrossFit or bodybuilding or P90X or whatever. Elite runners, whoops, this is backwards. Elite runners tend to do long multimodal warm-ups. So I had these reversed accidentally here. Recreationals, little or no warm-up. On it goes. Even the diets are different. So you get the picture. Like, recreational runners pretty much up and down the line. You pick a method that elite runners practice, and recreational runners are probably doing something very different, if not the opposite. So why? Why is it that mere mortals are doing things so differently from the best runners out there? The photo here, that's my friend Heather McCurdy. She's kind of a case in point. Before I say more about her, we'll go to the table on the left. These are the results from a study that looked at the training characteristics of a large pool of runners of different ability levels. And as you can see, so you've got their marathon times here in the top row. You have those from running 2.5 to 3 hours, 3 to 3.5, and so on. And you can see a clear pattern where the faster runners tend to run more often, and they tend to run higher mileage. Now, clearly, I know most of the people listening right now are thinking there's a chicken and the egg thing, right? It could be that faster runners are faster because they train more, and it could be that faster runners choose to train more. And I think it's actually both. But the point I'm actually making is that faster runners tend to train more. And why is that? This gets back to my friend Heather here. She started off as a mere mortal runner. She just liked it. She wasn't very fast. I mean, pretty much no one starts off as fast. And I remember her telling me that she felt like she held herself back because she didn't feel like she was fast enough to deserve to train like the pros. She's like, so her attitude was, what's the point of getting, sports massage? I'm not all that fast. What's the point of cleaning up my diet? I'm not all that fast. And it took her a while to arrive at an epiphany that she wasn't faster because she wasn't doing those things. So she was kind of caught in this, self-limiting psychology that I think is quite common. There's a natural tendency for people to invest more of themselves based on how good they are at something. So imagine a kid who tries out 10 different musical instruments, and they suck at the drums, but they have a knack for the guitar. Well, which instrument do you think that kid's going to end up taking lessons in and sticking with? The one that they have an immediate knack for. So that's a natural phenomenon. Like when a person starts running, and after a certain amount of time, you're going to realize whether you're good at it or not, or to what degree you're good at it. And most people, even if they have the trainability to train more, to invest themselves more in the training, they might just choose not to because they're not all that fast, and they think, what's the point? So I think that's part of it. I think there's also just a peer conformity factor. Obviously most 4-hour marathoners train with other 4-hour marathoners. They don't train with 2:30 marathoners. So when you're a new runner and you don't yet know how to train, you get into the sport, you make friends, you're going to end up training with people who are at about your performance level, and then you're just going to naturally end up doing what they do. So that's how folks kind of get stuck in their silo. So I think, there are other factors, but I've only got 30 minutes. So I think those are some of the major ones that explain. Oh, and another one is actually worth pointing out, that by and large, recreational runners they don't even pay attention to the pros. Running is not like a fan-based sport like football. It's a participatory sport. And, I've shown photos of me with some famous runners. Most recreational runners don't even know who those people are. The thought doesn't even cross their mind to look at what they're doing and perhaps model what they do after it. So that's yet another factor at work. So, all right, so I've established that elite runners and recreational runners train differently. Now, a skeptic might say, well, maybe they can't. Maybe what works, the methods that work best for those who have certain genes don't work as well for people who don't have those genes, who have like average or even below average talent. But what empirical evidence we have suggests that is not in fact the case. And it's really hard to study training volume. It's a lot easier to study intensity. So most of the best evidence is in the intensity distribution area. And intensity distribution is, what percentage of your time do you spend at low, moderate, and high intensity in training. The graphs from the left are from actually a brand new study, really cool study that collected it was like a big data approach that collected vast amounts of data from I think it was 14,000 runners. It was 16 million, something like that, different exercise sessions. And what they found was, as you would expect, the graph on the left shows how fast runners trained relative to their ability level. And this graph on the left shows that, as you would expect, faster runners tended to train faster. But what's masked in that graph is revealed in the one to the right, which shows that the faster, I guess let's just say the faster a runner was, but by faster I mean the times they achieved in races. So the data collected was not only from training sessions but from races. So those who were able to run faster race times actually trained at lower percentages of their VO2 max velocity. So while they were training faster, the faster runners were training faster in an absolute sense, they were actually training slower relative to their ability. Now that wouldn't apply to, speed workouts and such, but it does apply to things like easy runs and long runs that really account for the vast majority of the weekly training time for most runners. So that's interesting. So you could draw two conclusions here. One is, geez, slower runners should actually slow down and emulate the faster runners, train at on their easy days, train at a lower percentage of their max, and maybe that they would get better results. Or you could draw the conclusion that no, everyone's just intuitively finding their sweet spot, and slower runners just kind of need to train at a higher percentage of their max. But that's where you have prospective studies like the one summarized on the right here that can clarify that and help us draw the right conclusion. This is from this graph on the right here under the heading prospective findings. It's from the results of a study in which club level runners in Spain were divided into two groups. One of them followed a typical 50-50 training intensity balance, where they were spending only 50% of their weekly training time at low intensity. That's what the vast majority of recreational runners do. And the others did 80% of their training at low intensity and 20% at moderate to high. And that's what elite runners do. And what this graph shows is that the column, or those columns, whatever, the black lines represent the runners who were in the group that did 50% of their training at moderate intensity. And the longer the line is, the more they improved their 10K performance. And the clear lines represent runners in the group that did 80%, who followed the 80-20 rule of intensity balance. And the longer the line is, the more they improve their 10K time. And what you see is, the clear pattern is the higher a percentage of their training time was spent at low intensity, the more they improved their 10K time. And these were runners who, they were all male, and they all had times around 40 minutes for 10K. So above average runners, but far, far, far from elite level runners. So what this study shows, and it's just one study, is that if you take elite training practices and kind of scale them down to the recreational level, runners get, with average talent, get better results than they do when they train the way most of us currently train. So a case study, this is me. That guy right there, who's the back of whose head is in the foreground, is Scott Fauble, who was a 209 marathoner. So 3 years ago, I had a really interesting experience where I spent an entire summer training in Flagstaff, Arizona, with a team of professional runners, Team Northern Arizona Elite. And at the time, I was 46 years old. I had run about 40 marathons at that point. My personal best time was 2:41:29. That time was 9 years old when I arrived in Flagstaff, and I hadn't gotten within 8 minutes of it since I set that time. So I assumed that, basically my best marathon had already been run. I'm a serious recreational runner, and I felt like I do most of my training on my own. I'm a coach myself. I feel like I know what I'm doing. But it's one thing to train on your own, modeling what you do after the pros. It's another to actually have an elite level coach to train with a professional team and to completely immerse yourself in their lifestyle. So that's what the experiment was. Like, what if I take 13 weeks, an entire summer, to do absolutely everything the pros do? I had a sports psychologist I worked with. I did the team strength workouts. I had the access to, quality physical therapy services that they had. And over those 13 weeks, the way I described it, I felt like I was aging in reverse. I knew right away, even before. So the denouement was the Chicago Marathon, which I was actually able to run with a pro bib. Some strings were pulled on my behalf. So that was the final test, but I knew even before I got there that this was working. And it wasn't all one thing. I think it was just a lot of the little things that when you train on your own and you think you're training like a pro, but there's no one there watching over you. You know, you cut corners, you slack in certain ways, and all that was removed in the context where I just did what I was told by a guy who was coaching people trying to qualify for the Olympics. So long story short, I set a new personal best at age 46 in my 41st-ish marathon, 2:39:30. So yeah, I mean, there might be those thinking, well, you're practically elite yourself. No, I'm not. I mean, that's well above average, but that is far, far, far from elite. So, and again, this isn't science here, but it is an interesting case study. I didn't think that was possible going into it. So I think it shows that in kind of an anecdotal way that modeling your practices after the pros can work even if you don't have their level of talent. Finally, not to overstate the case. So the graph on the table graph on the left here is from another, well, fairly recent study showing the results of, so they took a group of, I'm not sure if they were runners or cyclists, or they were endurance athletes. And they had them train, they had each one train with 3 different approaches: high intensity, high volume, low intensity, and high frequency. So there were washout periods, but so each subject in the study went through all 3 approaches, and they were looking to see if there were different degrees of responsiveness to the 3 different approaches, and they found that there were. So some people responded really well to high intensity, but not to high volume, low intensity, and some vice versa. And so this shows that, though my argument is, we're all human and we can and should model what we do after the pros, we're also all individuals, and perhaps the perfect or optimal training formula for each of us is unique. And so you can't just blindly copy what you do after what anyone else does, elite or non-elite. However, I will say this: you have to have some sort of starting point. When as a coach, when I take on an athlete that I've never worked with before and I know nothing about, you have to give them something, right? And so my argument is essentially that the starting point should be start them off training like the pros, scale down obviously to their level. Training like the pros does not mean running 150 kilometers per week. It means running a lot relative to your history, your limits, etc. So yeah, your starting point is, assume the runner is human, and that non-elite runners are just as human as elite runners. And also, the other thing I would say is, in terms of starting point, is train for the event. Don't train your genes. A lot of people have funny ideas that they call it Darwin's dangerous idea for a reason. People have kind of muddled 3rd grade ideas of what genes are and how they work. And there's a sense that imagine like you went through comprehensive physiological testing before training for a marathon, and that testing revealed that you responded really, really well to sprinting and not very well at all to long distance running. Well, that doesn't mean you should train for a marathon by doing a whole lot of sprinting and not a lot of long distance running, just because that's what your genetic strength is. Regardless, the event is the event, and you need to train the body for the specific demands of that event, even if they're totally, they couldn't be further apart from your native strengths. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Like, yes, you want to tailor the training to the athlete's, individual responses, but it's not about, strengthening strengths and working around weaknesses. To a large degree, it needs to be the opposite. So you need to start somewhere. Emulating the pros is where you should start, and then you learn the athlete and adapt accordingly. That's the upshot. Oops. I haven't been paying attention to time. Are we anywhere near a half hour? Am I over, under?
5 minutes, dude. You're fine. You go. You keep going.
Okay. Well, I'm ready for questions now, basically.
Okay. Let's bring myself up then. All right. Fantastic. So yeah, people will do it the same as before. So if you'd like to ask some questions, I haven't got any pre-questions for Matt. So we'll, if you stop sharing your screen, then Matt, we'll bring everyone up. If you've got questions, guys, and bring yourself up on cam. and you can ask them personally. So you can close that down, Matt, and we'll see fantastic people in the room. Right, let's see if we've got some hands up here. How civilized. Right, Shweta, we've got, if you'd like to get on cam now, people, if you want to ask a question, then you can ask it personally on cam. Where's Shweta gone? Right, Shweta, I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Matt. Thanks for the presentation. Excellent. But what I would like to ask you is that the people who we train or who come to us are people who have normal lives, who have jobs, who work, who have so many stresses, whereas the elite runners do this professionally. Okay, so how do you balance that with the regular runners? Because the recovery doesn't happen the way the elite runners would, because I find a hard time telling them about the importance of recovery. They would train maybe hard as elite runners, but the other things don't fall in place. So can you just talk about that?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. You know, obviously, you know, elite runners and recreational runners have generally different circumstances that have to be accounted for when you're you know, prescribing training and recovery and the whole shooting match. But you know, that's why I make the point that when I say you should train like the pros, it's not in any crude sense. Like take diet, for example. Eating like the pros does not mean eating 5,000 calories a day. You know what I mean? If you're not burning 5,000, you don't eat 5. So that's not the way to understand what it means to train like a pros. You're really just, you're emulating their principles, the principles of their training. And those principles can be applied to, and like you could have a runner who only is able to train 3 times a week. The way I understand training like a pro, even that runner can train like a pro. You take the principles and you take the runner's lifestyle constraints and you match them as well as you possibly can. They're also, you know, training like a pro has many aspects to it. So there are certain things that maybe would be more difficult to implement in the lifestyle of someone who's very busy and has kids and a demanding job, but others would be much easier. The 80-20 intensity balance is a good example. It's a great starting point because there's no one on earth who can't simply do that, because you're just taking however much training they're already doing and reapportioning it, you know, the distribution. And it's actually easier. That's the irony, is that elite runners relative to their limits are training easier than recreational runners are. They're doing 80% of their training at low intensity, whereas, you know, most of us are doing 50% at low intensity. And, you know, I have an online training business. It's called 80-20 Endurance. And it basically, we sell training plans to athletes. And we've sold tens of thousands of these now, and this isn't science either, but we get feedback from athletes, and consistently we hear the same refrains over and over. Like, not only are athletes improving, but they're finding the training more manageable. Like they're saying, I get injured less, I recover better, I don't feel as tired, I enjoy training more. Like, you know, so, you know, it's, you know, that's what it means to train like a pro. So it's really very doable. And you might just like, you can make an itemized list of like, if I went back to that slide where I showed the bullet points of what the pros do and what rate, if you went, you could actually you could prioritize those in terms of like practicality and start with something that is very easy for a recreational runner to implement, and then go down. And once they're doing that, okay, what's next? What's something that maybe is still very doable for most people, but maybe not quite as doable? And then go as far as you can down that list. And, you know, if they never get to the point where they're running twice a day, oh, well, you know, so be it. But there's a lot that each and every runner on earth can do to train like a pro.
I think it's useful. Anyone who hasn't read Running the Dream yet, it kind of makes it clear that Matt has as many of the obstacles which a recreational runner will have. Like for some reason, he chose to go there with his partner, which was, you know, a great idea at the time. So obviously he had the guilt of maybe I should be spending more time with my partner, seeing the partner maybe not sharing the same kind of mental, you know. So that is happening during the 13-week training he did. Also, you can see during the book, there's the temptation by food, there's the self-doubt, there's the injuries, there's some questionable therapy that's given to him, which is an interesting read as well for any therapists. But yeah, it's definitely, I'm not just promoting the book here, but it makes you realize that Matt has many of the barriers which our clients will have, and it shows how he managed to overcome them in a as always very honest and humorous way often. So I do recommend the book. That was a great question, thank you. Let's go to Becky, who's patiently waiting there. Becky.
Thank you, Matt. That was brilliant. Similar to the last question, really, in terms of recreational athletes having possibly more limitations on their time with work and lives and things. Do we know if there's any kind of minimum volume for the 80-20 to be effective? So even if an athlete's very limited in the time they can dedicate to their training, is there a benefit to them doing slightly more intensity because they're time limited, or does that 80-20 principle still work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one I get a lot. I've written an entire blog post about it. And I think it'll be, if there's a mechanism for sharing that, not that I'm dodging your answer here, but I mean, not your question, but I think that because that's almost the first question you want to ask, right? The first question was, how do the elites train? All right, we answered that with some good studies. The second question is, well, does that also work for recreational athletes? That question has been decently addressed, but we still need to do more. And then the third question is, after we've seen that, you know, average runners do seem to improve with, you know, 80-20 training, is like, where is that minimum? How low does it go? You know, I have my own thoughts on it that, you know, just as a coach, when I wrote the blog post, I also went to Stephen Seiler. He's the researcher who sort of is credited with discovering the 80-20 principle. And I asked him that question, and he's, you know, one of the world's leading experts in endurance training. And he said, you know, he was just speculating a bit based on empirical and real world experience. But he said, you know, even if you had someone who could only train 3 times per week, and this is based on, like, you know, if it were himself and someone who actually cares about results and not necessarily about being right. Like, if he only could train 3 times a week and he wanted to get the very best out of that, he said he would do 1 high intensity session per week, 1 long session at low intensity, and then 1 session with some moderate efforts. So in that case, you're still trying to check all the boxes. You're still trying to be balanced. It's like, it's not all hit, you know, 3 times a week, just to be time efficient. I should point out that study I mentioned with the club level Spanish runners, their average training was 45 minutes a day. Okay. That's, you know what I mean? Like, even if you're not an athlete, the World Health Organization says you should spend that much time daily doing exercise if you just want to live, if you want to not have heart disease. So, you know, I think there may be a threshold below which you actually do improve more quickly with a different balance, with more of an emphasis on high intensity. But I honestly think that threshold is so low that like, who would want to run even half marathons if you're only going to train, you know, like 1 hour a week, you know, 3 times 20 minutes, whatever that threshold is. I think it's very, very low. Okay. One idea I've played around with a bit is, imagine you have someone who's just getting off the couch, and they're unfit, maybe they're older, maybe they're overweight, And so they're truly going from zero, but they've got it in their head. I want to take this all the way. I want to run marathons. I think that this is speculation, but I think that it might make sense for that person to go through an initial phase, like 6 to 8 weeks of really actually focusing on high intensity intervals. Because there is good, good short-term research showing that you really get a big bang from the buck with those high intensity intervals. And you can, see pretty big increases in VO2 max in a short period of time that you wouldn't see. The trouble is, if you're just getting off the couch, you can't do high volume training. Like, actually, no matter how unfit you are, you can do high intensity training. You know what I mean? It's just like fast for you isn't very fast, but you can still do fast for you. So I think that might be the case where you would just, it's sort of like this onboarding process, 6 weeks of high intensity, and then you graduate to 80-20. But so I feel like I know enough to, to guide the runners I coach in this area. But scientifically, there are some unanswered questions in that regard. Where is the floor below which 80-20 no longer applies?
Thank you. That's awesome.
I couldn't find the exact. I don't think I could find the exact blog there, Matt. But I've put a couple of links there. There's so many great articles on there anyway. But yeah, there's if you just go to the link I've put in the chat, then you will be able to search and you'll probably be able to find what you're looking for there. That's cool. I think the next question we got is coming from, let's just admit the school. There we go. Ben has got a question here. Go for it, Ben.
Yep. Hi there, Matt. Thanks for your talk there. It's absolutely great. A question kind of away from running to a point. I deal with a lot of runners who, say they do a lot of strength training, and you see what they term as strength training, and it tends to be the typical kind of low weights, high repetitions, that side of things. As a coach, I try to encourage them to do more of higher weights, particularly in the off season. How much emphasis would you put on high weights for them training, and so what sort of time period would you give them to build up their strength, particularly for beginner runners? Because I feel that there's a lot of injuries that come through that are basically down to weakness, and runners tend to shy away from lifting heavy weights because they feel like they'll get big and bulky and that will slow them down. What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I am not an expert on strength training. I know enough to be dangerous, as they say. But I mean, I have a long history of doing it myself. I've had exposure to people who really do know what they're doing in this dimension. So the way I approach it obviously there are some runners who they're just into it. They like it. They may have been into strength training before they got into running. And with them, it's a lot easier. But there are others who they don't have experience. They don't like it. They feel like, that's one more thing I have to make time for. So my starting point with those runners is to convince them, to persuade them that a little bit goes a long way. And the research backs that up. So pretty much anything you do, if you're going from zero, you're going to benefit from. So sometimes, I give people, like 15-minute body weight routines to do in front of the television in their pajamas in the evening before they go to bed. So it doesn't even feel like a workout because they're not even changing their clothes for it. So that can be sort of, a beachhead for some people. When you get beyond that point and, maybe someone is to get to your idea about bulking up, that's where I think I find it helpful to actually kind of, really make a shtick of the idea of training like the pros, because, what I'm trying to actually just kind of sell, lifting, going with heavier loads and that sort of thing. I will say, look, here's what the pros do. Do you see this guy here, like Ryan Hall? Do you see how skinny he is? Do you see how good at running he is? And this is how he strength trains. You know what I mean? Like, if you can, because people, they don't really have a lot of imagination, but if you can like put a picture in front of them, it'll sink in. It's like, the runner you want to be is doing what I'm trying to get you to do. So give it a chance. You know, so much of it is buy-in, right? Because I mean, we're not selling them a bill of goods. It really will benefit them to train with some heavier loads. And then in terms of like, you know, the actual mechanics of it, you know, I just, again, like I'm not the expert. I model my own practices based on what I have learned from the true experts. And it sounds like you're pretty much already doing that. I mean, you have to, I mean, if you're getting past that initial beachhead of doing body weight exercises in your pajamas and you want to really optimize strength training's contribution to your running performance, then you need to get into like full-on periodization of strength training, just as you do with your running. Like, so you're going to have phases. Obviously, you're not going to do, you know, your heaviest loads in the competition phase of training. When you know, you get to a point, and I saw this when I was training with the pros and Flagstaff, you know, like those are, you know, coached workouts where everyone comes to the same place. They're supervised. They don't design their own workouts. They're given workouts by a coach. And I would see some of the real pros just mailing it in, just kind of faking their way. Because like they would get to the point where they're so deep in a marathon cycle that they're in survival mode. You know, they're taking 2-hour naps in the afternoon. And they would just make their own decision. It's like, this is, I got to put strength training on the back burner, you know? And so that's just how it's done. There's like an ebb and flow to it. Yeah. Off season is a great time to go ahead and bulk up a little bit, you know? And then, yeah, so there are probably 3 or 4 different phases, also up and down weeks. You're not going full gas all the time. But yeah, I mean, there are good resources out there, certainly better than me in terms of like, how to actually strength train like a pro. But yeah, I hope that gave you something.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thank you. Cheers.
Fantastic. Great question. I should hasten to add, I've just been reminded by somebody that in the lead up to talking about Matt, he was actually in Flagstaff, not Falstaff. Falstaff is actually a Shakespearean character who appeared in Henry IV, I think, as a friend of Prince Hal. So thank you for clearing that up. Flagstaff, not Falstaff. And also in the same reminder, I was also reminded it was actually Chicago, not Boston. So yeah, I'm shit. What can I say? Sorry. There we go. No. So I hope that's clear. Any other questions? Let's go. I'm a bit concerned. Well, not concerned, but people not on cam, you don't have to be on cam to ask a question. There's like 56 of you who have got microphones off and they're just names, but you can, if you haven't got a cam or you don't want to talk out, feel free to type a question into the chat. It's all about inclusivity, so you don't have to show your face if you've got a question. I can keep my eye on the chat. Like now I'm looking in, and I'm gonna have a little look. Oh, here we go. Okay, suddenly it's all kicked in now. Oh, Sarah Jones says, I'm doing my running rehab right now. Nobody needs to see that. Well, Sarah, we'll take your word for that. Suzanne Gray asks, how do you measure the zones? Heart rate or run test / pacing? Thanks. Okay, yes, we talked about 20/80 or 80/20 in that. What's your preferred methods, Matt, for measuring zones? How do you know when you're in the zone?
Yeah, that's that's a Pandora's box, because there are lots of options, and things are ever changing. But I have a blog post on this topic as well, where it just from a pure pragmatic coaching perspective, if I want to prescribe training intensity targets that are appropriate for an individual runner, and I can only have one data point, one piece of information, I would like a 5K time. Because ultimately, once I was contacted by a editor at Runner's World, and they were doing an article on like it was like what they were asking, what sort of test would you have someone do if you wanted to know their potential as a runner? And my answer was run. Sometimes we try to make things, we try to be too clever by half in terms of like making running sciencey. But I mean, you're training to race, so why not race to see where you are? And 5K is pretty doable for just about anyone. Maybe not right out of the gate, but 5K race or time trial performance tells you a lot. And So I like that. It's a little bit painful, but I mean, that's running, so I don't really mind giving folks sort of a calibration test that's a little painful to do. It's not the only option. I'm just tossing it out there as like again, if I could only do, have one data point, that's where I would start. I find things like, that with the Garmin watches where they sort of auto estimate, threshold heart rate. I tune that stuff out because it's a coin flip. 1 out of every 4 times it seems dead on. Well, that's not quite good enough. It'll change 3 times a month. It's like, is my lactate threshold heart rate changing 3 times a month? Really? So you kind of have to go case by case with all the various methods out there. But yeah, again, I'll come back to 5K time trial is kind of my go-to.
I can't recall. I think it was yourself. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I'm not sure if it was you who wrote or commented on the fact that in Kenya, the runners will set off as if they're going to win practically a lot of training sessions. They don't hold themselves back like we tend to do in kind of the Western world sort of thing. And maybe there's a message for us there where they tend to go by feel rather than saying, right, I'm not allowed to go over this, and using kind of wearables and things. Was that yourself? Was it you wrote about that?
I have made that observation before. I mean, yeah, it's sort of, it's well known. Like it's one of the salient cultural differences in how East African runners approach training. They just, for them, like, one of my best friends grew up in Kenya, and he said that's just how it was. Like even in the schoolyard, outside of like the sport of running, if there was like a race, like everyone ran as fast as the fastest runner, and then only the fastest runner actually finished. Like that, like just culturally, that's how you did it. Like it was win or die trying. And yeah, I spent some time in Kenya myself a few years ago and went to the famous dirt track in Iten that's like, the proving ground of a million champions, and watched the track. It's kind of all comers. I mean, you would have literally like world champions training with people you've never heard of who were just looking for their shot. And that's how it went. Like in an interval session, you'd have 30 people just stampeding, like taking off all together. And then an hour later, there's only 5 left, and they're still going. Like you would hold the pace as long as you could. I mean, that's not the best approach if you're not the fastest runner. But they do, yeah, they go by feel.
How's that fit in with the whole 80-20 idea?
Well, again, it works for, like, if say you're responsible for all those runners and your goal is to produce 1 champion, that's a perfectly reasonable approach. Like if you don't care if you destroy 29 out of the 30, absolutely fine. You've still got your 1 champion. And if that's all that matters, great. Here in the States and elsewhere, it's more of like, well, we want everyone we want it to work for everyone as well as possible. And so that's where we'll have a different style. You might have a track workout with 30 participants, but they're in different pace groups, and everyone's kind of set up for success. And like, that's a reasonable approach if maybe you're less concerned about producing the 1 champion, but you want everyone to benefit equally.
We've got time for, I think, one last question here, which has been written in by Shane. He says, based on the 80-20 model and zones, do you use rate of perceived exertion to guide runners into these zones as well as data? If so, do you find that RPE can help or hinder your athlete's progress journey?
Yeah, there's a phenomenon, part of the reason that, one of the 9 or 10 or 12 reasons that most recreational runners are caught in what I call the moderate intensity rut is a phenomenon of what I call intensity blindness, where, put it this way, like if I tell the average recreational runner to go out and run at low intensity for 45 minutes, they'll go out and run at moderate intensity for 45 minutes, then come back to me and say, I did just what you said, coach. I ran at low intensity for 45 minutes. So that's intensity blindness, where you actually can't trust RPE to what you think is low intensity is actually moderate. So you have to go through a sort of a recalibration. You have to know what low intensity actually feels like before you can rely on it. You can rely on it, just maybe not today. So, the crucial threshold is the first ventilatory threshold. That's the intensity you want to be below if your intention is to train at low intensity. And, research shows that is associated with an RPE of 4 on a 1 to 10 scale. But I would highly recommend, if you're one of these, 99 out of 100 recreational runners who's currently in the moderate intensity rut, that you first use some objective metrics to find, okay, where is my ventilatory threshold in terms of heart rate, pace, or power, and then learn what that feels like. We're all capable of this, and then you can go by feel from there. The talk test is also super reliable. You can do, if you do like a kind of a rigorous talk test protocol, you can, and that's sort of semi-subjective. You can identify pinpoint your first ventilatory threshold that way as well.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Not unmuting myself. So there you go. So right, it's 3:52. So a few minutes to get ourselves ready. The 90-minute Q&A is going to start at about 4 o'clock UK time, and it's been 90 minutes with as many of the 10 speakers as we can have in the room. You're listening to Runchatlive podcast, putting the evidence back into running injury and performance.